Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today is Saturday, August 15th. We are now 80 days away from the elections in November. Obviously, in some respects, that still is quite a long time, but in the grand scheme, that is not long at all. That's a little under 3 months away, and we're getting closer and closer to reaching that point at which most campaigns over the years have sort of considered it, quote, the final push or the final blitz is another term that has been floated over the years in election cycles. So, as this is going to be our next presidential election video, and we have a lot more information now that the first little bits of polling are coming in after Biden's long-awaited selection of Kamala Harris, the junior senator from the state of California, to be his vice presidential running mates. We're going to go all 50 states once again. We've already broken down in one video how that we think the selection might affect Joe Biden's chances and Donald Trump's chances. In this video, it's just going to be a typical election prediction video. So as always, be sure to put any questions you may have as we go along in the comments below. So let's begin west to east as we always do. Hawaii, we're not even going to talk about it. Alaska, as we've discussed. In this state, the Democrats are still struggling to make up some ground in the Senate race here between Al Gross and Dan Sullivan. The little gaffe that Dan Sullivan had, accidentally posting a picture of himself with Elijah Cummings while trying to make a tribute video or photo of him standing with John Lewis, the late John Lewis, does not appear to have caused any blip in the polling for him. Of course, Don Young, I believe is his name, the representative from the state of Alaska, is doing pretty well still, although he is in a much tougher race than Dan Sullivan is to this point. Oddly enough, it usually goes the opposite way in that the Democratic Party is almost always able to outperform what they do on the presidential level in some of the other statewide races. For governor, for Senate, Mark Begich, of course, comes to mind, although the Democrats lost that gubernatorial seat back in 2018 in what was otherwise a pretty good year for them, at least on the governor and House level, and in some of the state legislatures. This time around, though, it's the opposite, where Joe Biden seems to be outperforming Al Gross, as we mentioned, and that pretty much gives you a sense of where Donald Trump is nationally, where his approval ratings are. So Alaska right now, we're going to label it likely. Washington's still a safe state. The protests that we've seen up there, the racial injustice protests, if anything, that's going to help drive up Democratic turnout even more, as we have discussed many times. There have been a couple states where we've seen that at its most prevalent. Washington, Minnesota, of course. We've also seen some out in Pennsylvania, some in Florida, and some in Texas. But Washington is definitely one of the biggest ones. Of course, Portland, Oregon has been the site of a ton of controversy. A lot of troubling images and videos coming out of the state of Oregon, especially in Portland. As if this was any doubt, it's going to go blue. This is a pretty safe Democratic state to begin with, and that's only going to, what we saw happen there is only going to drive out Democratic turnout even more. California, if there was a way I could label this even safer than what this characterization is, I would. Kamala Harris obviously pushes the Democrats over the top as if there was really any doubt in this state. I think it's possible that Joe Biden could win the state of California by 35 percentage points. Like even some of the more conservative areas of California, Fresno, and some of the areas in the southeast portion of the state are probably gonna vote blue on the presidential level, and then you combine that with San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, Sacramento, San Jose, and it's just a complete blowout. In the state of Nevada, of course, this used to be sort of, I think one or two models out there still I think JHK still considers this a swing state. But by and large, this is a blue state now. I remember Harry Reid all those years ago. And then, of course, as of the 2018 midterms, this is a state, in which the Democrats own, or control rather, the governorship and both Senate seats. Steve Sisolak was able to flip the governorship from red to blue in 2018, and then Jackie Rosen was also able to defeat Dean Heller to get one of two flips from red to blue in the Senate for the Democrats, while they lost 4 of their own senators to the Republicans. Remember, this was one of 4 states in 2016 where the polls were quote-unquote wrong, in the sense that the final polling averages had one candidate up, and then it ended up going the other way. Now, for all the talk about how quote-unquote wrong the polls were in 2016, I reiterate that they were not that wrong, and that in comparison to some other elections, they were actually more correct than usual. Okay, there were 4 states in 2016 which there was a state that was expected to go one way and went the other. There were 7 such states in 2018. or in 2008, I'm sorry, when Barack Obama defeated John McCain. That kind of tells you, and back then it wasn't nearly as surprising that Barack Obama won and won by the margin that he won. It was just that the media painted it a certain way. And even though Hillary was expected to win, remember the final averages had her winning 272 to 266. That's a nail biter. Okay, she was down in Florida, she was down in Ohio, she was down in North Carolina, she was down in Pennsylvania, and she was up in Wisconsin. I think she was up by 1 point in Michigan. And Trump, oddly enough, was actually ahead in Nevada, although as we've discussed many times, Republicans are often overstated in this state. So I'm going to label this safe because I just don't see on the presidential level, given Donald Trump's standing nationally, that he has virtually any chance to win this state. Idaho, as we've talked about, the Republican Party sort of has, or the Democratic Party, I should say, has shown the first signs of life in this state. Some of their candidates are able to get almost to 40%, like 38, 39%, which for a super, super red state is, it's certainly not as big a wipeout as Wyoming, where the Democrats often don't even field candidates, or Nebraska or Utah. But the Democrats also have the mayor of Boise now, which is kind of notable because Boise obviously is pretty much the only urban area in the state of Idaho. And so should Boise grow and become a decent-sized city, the Democratic Party might have something going for them, and then within a couple of years might be able to start creeping up towards the 45% mark. So just keep an eye on Idaho in future elections. In the state of Utah, as we've talked about, before, the Democrats obviously have this House seat, which is, again, very competitive. Ben McAdams defeated Mia Love back in 2018. Mitt Romney, of course, being elected to the Senate, has sort of added to potential for an underperformance, if you will, by Donald Trump in the state. He's obviously still going to win it, but some of the polls that have come out of the state have shown him up by 5 points, 6 points, as opposed to 28 points like you would expect in a state like this. Obviously, Joe Biden has no chance to win the state of Utah, but he could reach 40% just because I think the Mitt Romney factor, people love him in this state, and the idea that the sort of Evan McMullin factor is gone is a little bit of a misnomer. And that, if anything, I think that's going to help Ben McAdams in his case for re-election. So watch out for that one, because that's going to be a tough pickup for the Republicans. But on the presidential level, it's obviously still safe. All right, obviously in Arizona, this is the first pickup opportunity for the Democratic Party. This wasn't really on the map back in 2016. At least it wasn't on the Democrats' radar. But they came closer than people expected. Okay, Donald Trump only won it with a plurality of the vote. Hillary Clinton got around 45%. She lost by about a little over 3 points. As of 2018, there are more Democrats in the House of Representatives from the state of Arizona than Republicans. And, of course, the Democrats have one of the 2 Senate seats here, that being Kyrsten Sinema, who ousted Martha McSally, who looks like she's about to lose again, this time to Mark Kelly. And so between the likelihood that both senators are going to be Democrats, that more House members are going to be Democrats than Republicans, and it's going to go blue on the presidential level, suddenly Doug Ducey is left out there on an island by himself as the last little bit of Republican politics in the state of Arizona. So with the exception of the governorship, it's kind of becoming a blue state. And so I expect Joe Biden to take the state of Arizona. I think people have written this one off a little too quickly for Donald Trump. And even though I expect Joe Biden to win, I think it's going to be closer than people expect. It's not going to be something that's called right away. I would expect Biden to carry this like 51, 47, 48 with a third party capturing some votes down here. As we know, Phoenix, Arizona is the largest growing city in the United States. So keep an eye on this state. But as of now, I still have this as a lean Democratic state. And on the Senate level, remember, I have it as a likely Democratic pickup. Now, in the state of Montana, obviously there are so many different statewide races happening here. The House race, the governorship, a Senate race, and the presidential race. So you got 4 different elections going on here. Greg Gianforte, who represents the district currently, is running against Mike Cooney, the lieutenant governor of the state. Meanwhile, Steve Bullock, the current governor, is challenging Steve Daines, the incumbent Republican senator. Meanwhile, Kathleen Williams, a Democrat, is challenging Matt Rosendale. Both of those two have run for office before in the state of Montana. So you got all these different statewide races happening across the state. The Republican Party, though, right now, even though they've had some trouble in Montana in the past, where in 2008 Barack Obama came closer than people realized to winning the state of Montana, there has not been a Republican governor of the state since 2000. And the Democrats have a pretty good candidate this time around with Mike Cooney. So far, the Republicans are doing their job. They're going to win it on the presidential level. As we know, Steve Daines is leading Steve Bullock, not by a whole lot, but he is leading Steve Bullock. Matt Rosendale is leading Kathleen Williams. And Greg Gianforte is doing pretty darn well so far, despite his checkered past after body slamming that report against Mike Cooney. So on the presidential level, it's going to be safe, and keep an eye. This is going to be a pretty good state, I think, for the Republicans in 2020. Wyoming, again, I know it's kind of a recurring joke on this channel by now, but there's just nothing to talk about. Okay, there's just nothing to talk about. Colorado. Now, obviously, some metrics, including 538, still label this a swing state. I do not. I think it's a safe Democratic state on the presidential level, so we'll characterize it that way. Obviously, John Hickenlooper, the former governor, is likely going to defeat Cory Gardner, being that is going to be a crucial state towards the Democrats' hopes of flipping the Senate. They sort of have these two southwestern states, the other being Arizona, as big potential flips for them. New Mexico. Ben Ray Lujan is running for that open Senate seat. He's winning so far. New Mexico also is typically considered a swing state. The Republican Party, the Trump campaign, is currently still holding ads in the state of New Mexico. So they think they can be competitive here. But let's face it, do we really think Joe Biden's not going to carry these 5 votes? He's not. It's going to be safe. North Dakota, we've talked about before how Kent Conrad and Heidi Heitkamp have done pretty well to keep themselves in the United States Senate, help the Democratic Party in this state out. But right now on the presidential level, it's too safe. Obviously, back in 2008, that was such a big Democratic wave year. The country was very, very sick of the Bush administration by that point. And so much so that North and South Dakota were not even called until several hours after poll closing. Imagine that. Same in South Dakota. We've talked about before how the Democratic Party in the state of South Dakota is one of the strongest state parties of either party on any level, pretty much. Okay, Kristi Noem, the Republican, I believe Bill Sutton was his name, the Democratic candidate who got 47% of the vote in that gubernatorial race. So never quite count out sort of a surprise happening in South Dakota, but never on the presidential level. Nebraska, nothing to talk about. It's not really like these states where you can see some Democratic life. Here, it's just completely gone. Although it's not over yet that Joe Biden could carry this district, the Lincoln and Omaha area. But as of now, Donald Trump continues to lead there. In the state of Kansas, we've talked about how in some of the statewide races, Chris Kobach has spelled disaster out for the Republicans. He has struggled, going 0 for 2. He lost the governorship race to Laura Kelly, the Democratic woman who's now the governor there. And he lost the primary to the Representative Roger Marshall, who is now being challenged by Barbara Bollier for that Senate seat. Barbara Bollier, remember, most prognosticators correctly assumed, as I did, I think, that Barbara Bollier really only had a chance to win against Chris Kobach. But so far, in some of the early preliminary polling that we're seeing after that primary that was held, I believe 8 days ago now, what we've seen, 11 days ago, pardon me, what we've seen is Roger Marshall is, yes, leading Barbara Bollier, but only by about 2-3 points. So Bollier is alive and well. That's a competitive race. We're seeing a lot of money being poured into it. Although what's hurting the Democratic Party's cause here in that Senate race is that so much of that race went into just boosting Chris Kobach's chances. And so Barbara Bollier, incidentally, doesn't really have that much cash on hand. And so I think that the Democratic Party was really only going to back her. Well, of course they're going to back her, but was really only going to put a full court press on in the event that Chris Kobach was a nominee instead of Roger Marshall. And of course, on the presidential level, this is going to be safe. Oklahoma, we're not even going to talk about it. Donald Trump won every single county. He may not do that again, but he's going to win it by 25 points at least. Texas, big one to discuss here. Okay, so back in 2018, you know what? We can back up even further than that. Barack Obama, both times, okay, in 2008 and 2012, got well over 40%. Okay, got 56, 44, somewhere in that range. Now, obviously, that's not quote unquote close, but what it is pretty respectable. Okay, for a state that's very red and has been basically the Republican Party's California, that's pretty good if you can get 44%. The Republicans don't get 44% in California. Hell, sometimes they don't even get 34% out in California. Okay, so what we're seeing out of Texas, though, is that the Democrats are able to consistently build on past success. And that culminated in Beto O'Rourke, the representative from out here in the El Paso area. He challenged Ted Cruz for the Senate in 2018 and got pretty close. Okay, he got over 48% of the vote. He famously visited all 254 counties in the state. and did a pretty good job in challenging Ted Cruz, who was obviously deeply unpopular. It was the toughest race of Ted Cruz's life to this point in the Senate. There was a governorship election as well where Lupe Valdez didn't come quite as close, but still did pretty well, 43, 44%, which again is good for a red state against Greg Abbott. This time around, there is another Senate race, but it's obviously not nearly as competitive a Senate race. MJ Hager, who ran for Congress back in 2018 and lost, she generated a lot of buzz after a very, very popular campaign ad that went viral entitled Doors. Regardless of what your political affiliation is, just from an artistic perspective, I encourage you to go watch it. It's really interesting. She came up short, but did a good job in what was a red seat. But here's what gives the Democratic Party a lot of enthusiasm and optimism in this state, is that the fact that we're talking about a Senate race that is not that it's pretty easy to tell who's going to win that Senate race. The reality is MJ Hager this time is going to get over 45%. She's probably, in fact, I would imagine, because it's also a Democratic wave year, John Cornyn is not particularly popular either. He's just not on Ted Cruz's level, that she could get to 46, 47%. And so that shows you, that this state continues to slowly shift. Demographic shifts are favoring the Democratic Party down here. While MJ Hager is going to come up short, Joe Biden may damn well win the state of Texas, okay? I still think it's going to be a tilt Republican, but right now I have it around 51.5 to 48.5, okay, somewhere in there. And the Republicans are having to spend a lot of money down here in Texas, just as they're having to spend money in South Carolina and Iowa, even in Missouri, to a lesser extent, but they're having to spend a little bit in Indiana. So you can tell how they're having to spend money in some of their base states. In the state of Minnesota, Donald Trump, as we've talked about in this channel before, thought of this state as a real pickup opportunity because what we saw was Hillary Clinton only was able to carry this state by about a point and a half, also with a plurality. Now, I think part of that was that voters stayed home. They were complacent, the whole thing. Since then, the Democrats have completely shut the door in Minnesota. There were 3 statewide races in 2018. Both Senate seats were up because Al Franken resigned and Amy Klobuchar's term was up. Amy Klobuchar easily won re-election. Tina Smith, not by as much as Amy Klobuchar, but also easily won re-election. And the governorship was also up, and that went to the Democrat Tim Walz. So the Democrats went 3 for 3 in the state of Minnesota. The Republicans actually managed to flip a House seat, which kind of slipped under the radar a little bit. I think it was on the western portion of the state here. But by and large, those things combined with the George Floyd murder and the protests that we saw from there, turnout is going to be damn high. And that's going to help the Democrats. I'm labeling it safe. All right, now in Iowa, we've also talked about, I have so much interest in this Senate race happening here because it's so difficult to always put your finger on exactly what in the world is happening in Iowa. It's such a strange state. It went for Barack Obama both times, 2008 and 2012, then went for Donald Trump by a huge margin in 2016. The governor and both senators are Republican, but the Democrats have 3 out of the 4 House districts, and the only one they don't have is up here in Northwest Iowa, which is a super conservative district, who's of course represented by Steve King for many, many years. So on the presidential level, I still label this a lean Republican because we just haven't seen the Democrats really break through. They finally managed to get that one poll, I forget who the pollster was, about 2 weeks ago that had the Democrats up by 6 points in the state of Iowa. So that at least finally gave the Democrats a reason to believe that they have a shot here. Obviously, they're spending quite a bit of money here. A lot of prognosticators and evaluators still list this as a swing state, kind of similar to Colorado and New Mexico, but I still think it's going to end up in the Donald Trump camp. Missouri. Remember, Barack Obama came really, really close. Only lost the state of Missouri by 4,000 votes in 2008. Claire McCaskill, of course, was able to survive those years of where Romney came in, where the House flipped, all that, but she lost in 2016 by about 6 percentage points to Josh Hawley, a noted Donald Trump ally. Some polls we've seen are pretty close, and one even had Joe Biden leading by 2 points. Is Joe Biden going to win the state of Missouri? Absolutely not. Is he going to make it closer than it was in 2016? Absolutely. Okay, we've also talked about how there have been some studies done that if all of Kansas City was in Missouri and not half in Kansas, and all of St. Louis was in Missouri and not half of it in Illinois, this would actually probably be a blue state, or at least a very purple state. But right now, I'm going to label it likely just because we have seen Joe Biden win a poll here or two. And that, just to be generous, we're going to label that likely, but it's really a safe state. Arkansas, we're not going to talk about it. Louisiana, we're not going to talk about it. All right, in Wisconsin, Obviously, this is one of these Rust Belt states, and this is obviously one of the more fascinating ones to talk about because this was really the only state that was as quote-unquote wrong as everyone paints the election out to be polling-wise from 2016. Hillary Clinton led by over 6 points on election day. So that's why when Donald Trump won this state, it was just a complete shell shocker. Like, no one could understand how that happened. We were all flabbergasted. But since then, again, similarly to Minnesota, similarly to Michigan, similarly to Pennsylvania, it's been all smiles for the Democrats. Okay? Tammy Baldwin easily won re-election by 11 points in 2018. Tony Evers, who's scheduled to speak at the DNC coming up next week, won his re-election, ousting Scott Walker, by the way, a very notable and nationally renowned Republican. Okay, that was big for the Democrats, at least. In the southern portion of the state, there was a state Senate special election early on in Donald Trump's term, I believe within the first year, that the Democrats won, gave them a Democrat representing a district that had not been represented by a Democrat in, I believe, over 30 years. And then capping it off, there was earlier this year, you guys probably remember this, a Supreme Court race in the state of Wisconsin that the Democrats won, despite the fact that we saw an active effort to reduce the amount of turnout and the amount of voting amongst the voting participants in that populace up in the state of Wisconsin. And the Democrats still took that Supreme Court race. So that combined with polling being on the side of Joe Biden kind of tells you where this state stands right now. In fact, I would say even if you apply the same shocking shift, which is a tall order for Donald Trump that we saw in 2016 from where the polls were, I still think Joe Biden carries the state of Wisconsin. Right now, I had this as a likely as a result. In Illinois, safe seat. Dick Durbin, J.B. Pritzker, and Tammy Duckworth, who obviously got a lot of national attention as she was hotly considered to be the vice presidential nominee, gives you pretty much all you need to know in the state of Illinois. It's a safe Democratic state. We'll keep going south kind of here in the state of Kentucky. It's going to be safe on the Republican, on the presidential level. Of course, Andy Beshear was able to get the governorship after Matt Bevin had his whole checkered past, and then Andy Beshear was able to get it for the Democrats, but he still only barely won it in that race. Amy McGrath, who's a very moderate Democratic senator, is challenging Mitch McConnell. She's doing a good job. She'll probably crack 40%. She's a fundraising superstar, but she's not going to win, let's be honest. All that, is only on the state level, of course, and the Republicans still usually come out on top. And on the presidential level, it's easily going to go to Donald Trump. In Tennessee, it's a safe state. Not since the days of Phil Bredesen and Al Gore have we really seen the Democrats have any chance of actually being able to pull this state out. And these 11 votes are going to easily go for Donald Trump. In the state of Mississippi, what we've seen is Mike Espy this time around is kind of narrowing up that Senate race as he is challenging Cindy Hyde-Smith to a rematch. There was that special election. I forget who it was. I forget the Republican senator who left. It's not Roger Wicker. It's the other one. But anyway, Mike Espy is challenging Cindy Hyde-Smith and is probably going to come up short, but probably, again, do a pretty respectable job. He got close last time, 54-46. I expect it to be around that same mark this time. On the presidential level, though, I'm only going to label it likely just because this is the highest minority population state in the country. You can expect turnout to be high. Again, as I've reiterated many times on this channel, it's not a political statement. It's simply a factual statement that there's been a lot of pretty hairy comments, let's just put it, on the race side of things from the president, from the Republican Party, from a number of senators, all that, including Cindy Hyde-Smith for that matter. And that's going to boost Democratic turnout. And so in Mississippi, it'll definitely still go to Donald Trump, but probably not by as big a margin. Alabama, same thing. You can probably expect it that way. I'm only going to put it safe because it's usually not as close. It's probably turnout is going to be high because I think that voters are very eager to oust Doug Jones and vote for someone other than Roy Moore, even though that guy is Tommy Tuberville, who doesn't hold any elected office, has never held elected office, and instead has spent his career on the sideline with a headset on calling zone blitzes for Cincinnati and for Auburn. But he's likely going to win, and Donald Trump will certainly win. In the state of Florida, big one here in the Sunshine State, this kind of differently than Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, has been pretty kind to the Republicans since 2016. The Democrats in 2018 did manage to get a couple House seats flipped in South Florida, but apart from that, they didn't do much at all to help their cause. Okay, Bill Nelson, who'd been in Democratic politics in the state of Florida for decades. He lost to Rick Scott by 0.2 of a point. Remember, this was expected to be a state in which the Democrats were going to hold on to that Senate seat and get the governorship back after, we saw a lot of turnout. We saw a lot of activism after the Parkland school shooting. But no, Ron DeSantis was able to hold on and win by 0.4 of a point in the state of Florida. Rick Scott was able to defeat Bill Nelson by 0.2 of a point. But since then, polling is very, very much on the side of Joe Biden so far in the state. Furthermore, Ron DeSantis is very unpopular. His approval ratings are very, very, very low right now in the state of Florida. One of the more unpopular governors in the state. I think Joe Biden right now is going to barely edge this one out. I'm going to say like 50.8 to 49.2. Okay, it'll be real close, but I expect Joe Biden to carry the state of Florida. In the state of Georgia, I know a lot of polls have had Joe Biden up here, okay, some by even as many as 4 and 5 points. But this state kind of has more of an identity than Florida has, even though Florida, if anything, leads a little bit to the right because it went for Bush in 2000, it went Bush in 2004, but it went Obama in 2008, 2012. And, it's also had a Democratic senator for a number of years. There have been a lot of Democratic House of Representatives members. And, of course, even the elections that the Republicans win, the margins are so close in this state. Whereas Georgia really does have a certain Republican identity. There are 2 Senate races up this time. Jon Ossoff is doing his best against David Perdue, but he's not going to win. Let's face it. David Perdue, he'll probably win by 4 or 5 percentage points. Stacey Abrams was as good a candidate as the Democrats are going to field in the state of Georgia, and she also lost. Keep an eye on Keisha Lance Bottoms running for statewide office because she might actually stand a chance against Brian Kemp or when Doug Collins, who I expect to win the state Senate special election, or rather the regular Senate special election, he could end up being challenged by Keisha Lance Bottoms, and that could be a competitive race. But on the presidential level, I have it as a tilt Republican. South Carolina, I'm going to label this likely Republican. I will say, keep an eye on this Senate race, okay? I usually had that rated safe or likely on our Senate prediction election videos between Jamie Harrison and Lindsey Graham. But keep an eye on this, okay? Because in 2018, Joe Cunningham was able to become the first coastal representative from the state of South Carolina in a long time. And since then, the polling between Harrison, who's a fundraising wizard, has repeatedly set records for it, including $13.9 million raked in back in June. He's giving Lindsey Graham a real hard time, and a number of donors have also defected from the Graham campaign. It's not just that Jamie Harrison has a huge war chest; it's that Lindsey Graham's has shrunk. Okay, so he's not even really competitive in terms of the fundraising battle, which is going to easily be won by Jamie Harrison, who's already engaging in just an absolute barrage of advertisements, all that stuff. So keep an eye on this Senate race because the last poll had them tied. It's continued to narrow up little by little. So just keep an eye on that. North Carolina, on the presidential level, I have this going tilt Democrat because it's not just that they're basically tied, Trump and Biden, in this state on the presidential level. It's that the rest of the races, there's a governorship race here between Roy Cooper and Dan Forest that the Democrats are expected to win. Roy Cooper is a very popular governor. He's going to win that race. There are 2 House districts in the southern portion of the state along the South Carolina border that I expect to go from red to blue. And then furthermore, Cal Cunningham, the former veteran, is defeating Tom Tillis so far in that Senate race. And so all that is probably going to boost turnout. Another state with a high minority population, that's probably going to spell trouble for Donald Trump. I have this going the Democrats' way. Virginia is a safe Democratic state on all levels at this point. Okay, the state legislature is fully controlled by the Democrats now. Ralph Northam, he's the governor still. Mark Warner, popular Democrat incumbent, is being challenged by Daniel Gay. That's not even a competitive race. This used to be a Republican state, no longer. West Virginia, safe Republican state. Indiana, we talked about how the Republicans still have to put a little bit of resources into this state, but not enough to make them concerned. The Democrats still have that one House member, I forget his name, right here in the Indianapolis area, but it's still going to be safe on the presidential level. Now, Ohio, the Democrats were obviously pretty disappointed in just how much this shifted to the right in 2016 after Barack Obama, similarly to Iowa, carried it both times in 2008 and 2012. Donald Trump won this state easily. Okay, this is a tough state. It's always been a tough state for the Democrats because it's It's a very Catholic state. Even the Democrats in the state of Ohio are pro-life, and Republicans notably steal them all the time. Okay, Mike DeWine won the governorship there. It's a Republican legislature, the whole thing. It's a very gerrymandered state. That's certainly not going to change, although gerrymandering doesn't really affect presidential level voting here. So listen, this state will definitely narrow up. Sherrod Brown was able to win re-election back in 2018, so this state will narrow up. It won't be as big a margin as it was 4 years ago, but I still expect Trump to win it. I think Joe Biden will max out around 48%. In the state of Maryland, safe Democratic state, very little to discuss there. D.C. is definitely going to go the Democrats' way, the most liberal area in the United States. Delaware, very safe for the Democrats. Of course, the state Joe Biden represented for many years in the Senate. New Jersey, we've talked about before how the Republicans have sometimes been able to get some things done here in this state, notably with Chris Christie, and have been competitive in some other statewide races, but they usually come up short, and they're definitely not going to win in this election. Connecticut's safer Democratic state. This is a state, though, that don't sleep on Connecticut for the long term for the Republicans, because we've seen a number of those very wealthy insurance types that have moved out there and have since kind of shocked the Democrats with just how close some of the elections have been. The attorney general race was very close there, and the governorship race was really close. Ned Lamont, the Democratic governor of Connecticut, barely won this one back in 2018. So don't totally sleep on this over the long term, but certainly now and in the future, in the near future at least, it's definitely going to be a safe Democratic state. Rhode Island, nothing to talk about there. Jack Reed is also going to be fine. Massachusetts, obviously we've mentioned this, the Senate primary between Ed Markey and Joe Kennedy. Markey's probably going to win that, and he's certainly going to defeat the Republicans there. All right, in the state of Michigan, similarly to Wisconsin, we saw how the midterms were very kind to the Democrats. Okay, Gretchen Whitmer pretty easily defeated Bill Schuett, the Republican candidate, got the governorship back to the Democrats. Not since Jennifer Granholm have the Democrats had the governorship here. They have it this time. Debbie Stabenow faced kind of an underrated opponent when she was facing off against John James. John James, of course, the black candidate, kind of a rising star within the party. He's giving it another shot. He's trying to defeat Gary Peters, but so far that's not going too well for him either, as he's getting beaten pretty thoroughly at this point by Gary Peters. Okay, he came up about 5 or 6 points short of Debbie Stabenow, who is the much more well-known Democratic senator nationally than Gary Peters, and so far Peters is not having any trouble. Furthermore, after those two races, the governorship and the Senate went the Democratic Party's way. The Republicans have basically waved the white flag here, and they've pulled their ads out of the state of Michigan, a la Hillary Clinton, back in 2016. They're just surrendering it here, and so why should we believe, especially after it only went to Trump by 0.27%? Why should we believe that this is not going to go the Democrats' way? I have it likely. Okay, I think this area of the country is going to go blue. And so there it is. That puts Biden up over the 270 mark at 274. In the state of Pennsylvania, another state that was very kind to the Democrats back in 2018, but hostile, obviously, in 2016. Because remember, it wasn't just that Trump won it. It was that the Democrats weren't able to get Patrick Toomey ousted. That was a big disappointment for them as they tried to flip the Senate. Because they did make 2 pickups in the Senate, one in Illinois and one in New Hampshire. Since then, Bob Casey, the incumbent Democratic senator, easily won re-election. The governorship, Tom Wolf, easily won re-election. Some of the House races that the Republican incumbents won were closer than they were in years past. That combined with polling leads consistently for Joe Biden, they've made a very large and concerted effort to get turnout in suburban Philadelphia out. I also expect Pennsylvania to go blue. I'm going to put this as a lean margin. Remember, Joe Biden has ties here. Scrappy Scranton Joe, as he was always called. So there you go, having flipped the Rust Belt, also Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina. New York, safe Democratic state. Vermont, safe Democratic state. New Hampshire, it was the closest race on the presidential level in 2016. Do not forget that. And also don't forget that in 2022, Maggie Hassan, the incumbent Democratic senator, is up. And she in 2016 won her race by 0.1%. Okay, so if they throw Chris Sununu, the very popular Republican governor, at her, the Republicans can pick up a Senate seat in doing so. However, Jeanne Shaheen, the other Democratic senator, is up for re-election this time around, and she is easily defeating Kelly Ayotte. Okay, the Republicans can win races in New Hampshire. They just have to get a very notable and rather moderate candidate nominated. They haven't done that, okay, this time around. New Hampshire, on both the presidential level and the Senate level, is going to be safe for the Democrats. In the state of Maine, now this is going to be our only split ticket. I'm going to have these 2 votes go Joe Biden's way and this one. And then this one, however, is going to just go for Donald Trump. It's going to be 3 out of the 4 go Joe Biden's way. And so there's your map. Remember, the Democrats in Maine, they're looking really good so far to oust Susan Collins, as Sarah Gideon is continuing to lead in that Senate race. They also picked up the governorship here. Remember, there were 7 governorships that flipped from red to blue. Maine, Michigan, Wisconsin, Kansas, Nevada, and Illinois. So all those, races were obviously very big and were basically the biggest reason, other than flipping the House, that the Democrats had a quote-unquote good night back in 2018. So there you have it. 333 to 205. That's not necessarily a landslide. Okay, I would call it a landslide if Biden was able to win Ohio and Georgia, but as of now, we're not really able to say that just yet. 333 to 205 is that map. So thank you guys again so much for watching this video. Please comment down in the suggestions below. If you have any questions, I'll be sure to answer them in upcoming videos. I always try to connect with my viewers in that way. Comment down in the suggestions below. Hit the subscribe button if you're not already, and as always, hit that like button. So thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.